Beto, I was struck reading this that your veterans plan doesn't start with what we usually see, sort of the boilerplate about the VA, but you jump right in with this idea of ending the forever wars. Why is that the most important thing that you could do to help veterans?
There are all these incredibly heroic young women and men from this country who are fighting wars that we've been in Afghanistan for 18 years, in Iraq for all intents and purposes for the last 28 years. No definition of victory, no strategy, no end in sight, and yet they're willing to put their lives on the line for this country, willing to sacrifice their lives for America. I want to make sure that not only are we there for them when they come back home, sparing no expense to care for them, to treat their PTSD, to make sure that they're connected with their purpose and function back in civilian life. I want to make sure that we ask ourselves a question why they're going to war in the first place. And if we cannot define victory, if we do not have a strategy, if our interests are not served by going to war, let's end those wars, bring those service members back home to their communities, to their families, and to their country. That's perhaps the best thing we can do. And that idea is inspired by veterans that I've listened to, who want to make sure that going to war is the absolute last resort for this country.
What does a responsible end to the war in Afghanistan looks like? I feel like we've been talking about getting out of that country for 10 years. How do you do that in a way that you don't have ISIS or Al-Qaeda or somebody else right on our heels the minute we pull out?
Ensuring that we've satisfied the reasons that we went to war in the first place. Holding those accountable who struck the United States, killed American citizens, and ensuring that Afghanistan can never be used as a base to launch attacks on America again. It's incredibly important that we ensure that we've satisfied those two conditions, and I believe that we have. It's now time to work with our partners and other stakeholders in the region to bring every single one of those U.S. service members back home to this country, to work diplomatically instead of militarily to pursue our foreign policy aims in Central Asia, and then to make sure that we work constructively with civil society, with the government in Kabul and other partners to ensure that other priorities, a democratic form of government where the people of Afghanistan are represented, the full human rights of the people of that community, including, importantly, women and girls, is prioritized, but doing so non-militarily and not at the price and consequence of U.S. service members having to serve in that country.
Do you think 4 years into a O'Rourke administration there are still some American service members in Afghanistan?
No, I don't think so. I think having satisfied our goals and our aims in Afghanistan, by the end of that administration, our U.S. service members would be back home. We will work collaboratively with friends and partners, allies, and stakeholders in the region to ensure that we pursue our foreign policy aims and to ensure that we keep America safe and secure. So if there is a resurgence of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, if there is a threat of an attack on the United States or on U.S. citizens or on U.S. interests, we will take that very seriously and we will stop that. But there is no reason to continue this war in Afghanistan. We need to bring it to a close and bring those U.S. service members back home.
To me, the most interesting idea in your plan was this concept of a war tax. I think that'll turn heads when people just hear that phrase. What does that mean to you?
It means that before we go to war again, after we've ended the wars that we're already in, we're going to make sure that we understand the full cost and consequence of going to those wars. It's not just deploying the women and men, the missiles and the bombs. It's their care when they come back. I'll give you an example. It took us 40 years to recognize exposure to Agent Orange as a presumptive condition for the cancers that Vietnam-era veterans were dying of. It's more than 28 years since we first heard about Gulf War syndrome, and we have yet to fully pay the cost for the research and the innovation and the care for those who served in those wars. The toxic burn pits in Afghanistan, in Iraq. I want to make sure that before we go into the next war, we've set aside a fund, a Veterans Trust Fund, that will pay for the care of those who have borne the battle in those wars. One, it ensures that we fulfill our commitments and meet our end of the obligation. And two, it might make America pause before we enter that next war because we'll fully realize the full cost of waging those wars.
That's the idea, right? To make someone like me who doesn't have anyone in their immediate family serving actually stop and think about the cost of what our servicemen and women are doing, right?
That's right. The wars that we're fighting today, we're asking the children of tomorrow to pay for. We've racked up nearly $6 trillion in debt for the post-9/11 wars. We've asked the military service members, their families, veterans to bear that cost, and importantly, they would be exempted from any war tax, but we've allowed the rest of America to pay for these wars on our credit cards and have our kids pay it back, or crowd out other funding priorities, or even threaten the security of those who paid in to Social Security and Medicare their entire lives. It's time to pay for these wars as we fight them, and to ensure that those families who do not have U.S. service members, who are not composed of veterans, pay their fair share as well.
In the plan, you talk about authorized wars. I don't have to tell you, most of the places where our men and women are fighting right now are not places we've declared war. In an O'Rourke administration, does that change? Would you commit to saying we're only going to put troops on the ground in places where Congress has explicitly authorized it?
That's right. We'll only go to war when the people of this country, through their representatives in Congress, as laid out in Article 1 of the United States Constitution, decide that we're going to go to war. We know the consequences of failing to do that. 18 years ago, 2001, we declared an authorization for the use of military force. And interestingly, only one member of Congress voted against it, Barbara Lee of Oakland, California. And she said that she was worried that we would cut a blank check for war, and how prescient that warning was, because here we are in 2019 in Afghanistan with absolutely no end in sight, no definition of victory. But that authorization passed in 2001 underlies our presence in Syria, in Iraq, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Libya. These wars have metastasized because we have not lawfully declared them through Congress. So in addition to ending those wars, as president, I will make sure that we only take this country into war as a last resort, and only lawfully when the people through their representatives in Congress have declared it.
How do you address the 20 veterans a day who take their own lives after they come home?
In my administration, we will make suicide reduction our #1 clinical priority at the VA. We will spare no expense and will pay any price to make sure that every returning veteran is connected to the care that they need. Importantly, as they transition from active service to civilian life, we'll make sure that they're enrolled in the VA, not wait for them to do that proactively. I know of veterans who have waited 5, 10, 20, 50 years after coming back from Vietnam to address PTSD that they incurred in service to this country. Let's get them care right away. Let's make the VA a center of excellence in the treatment of opioid addiction and abuse, and in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's hire the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the therapists, and the social workers who can deliver that care and make sure that veterans are not waiting in lines that stretch months, sometimes years, to be able to see a provider. When we meet our end of the commitment, those veterans are going to get care very quickly. They're going to get back on their feet, and they're going to be able to live with the purpose and the function and the dignity that they deserve after having put their life on the line for this country.
Part of running for president is passing this commander-in-chief test, right? I mean, you're talking about this veterans plan. You've got actual veterans running in this race. I mean, you've got Seth Moulton and Pete Buttigieg, Tulsi Gabbard. You have a vice president who was in the room making a lot of these decisions. How would you compare or put your experience up on Veterans Affairs, Armed Services in that conversation?
I was fortunate enough to have represented El Paso, Texas, which is home to Fort Bliss, the 32,000 active duty service members who are there, home of the 1st Armored Division, was there when women and men deployed to these wars. As a member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, was there to try to help take care of them when they came back from these wars. In the minority, every single day I was in Congress, I was able to pass and get signed into law legislation that expanded mental health care access to help veterans who otherwise would have been denied the care and the treatment that they deserved by serving this country. So I've seen what this takes, the toll on service members and their families. I've worked successfully to make sure that we are there for those who've stood up for this country. And I can speak to the cost of war, not just the service member, but their families, our communities, and our country. And so as Commander-in-Chief, I'll make my #1 priority keeping this country safe, making America secure. But I will ensure that we do so thoughtfully, deliberately, and use war only as a last resort, and ensure that those who have borne the battles of this country are cared for and treated with the respect and the dignity that they've earned and that we owe to them.
Sort of a news of day question here. You talk about using war as a last resort. We've been watching the president apparently go back and forth on whether or not to strike Iran at this point. What would you do if you were still sitting in Congress? What should your former colleagues do about the possibility that this president might act unilaterally on Iran?
President Trump has diminished the standing of America, and he's diminished the security and safety of this country. He's turned his back on our allies and partners, making it less likely that we will be able to successfully confront Iran. Confront Iran on their provocation in the Strait of Hormuz, confront Iran for their funding of terrorism, confront Iran on their development of ballistic missile technology, and confront Iran to ensure that they do not develop a nuclear weapon. We need to re-engage with our allies and our friends and our partners and provide a united front against Iran. That's the best way to ensure that we achieve our foreign policy aims, and it's also the best way to ensure that we do not go to war. Under the Barack Obama administration, without firing a single shot, without invading another country, we were able to work with friends and partners and allies, and even those countries like Russia and China and Iran, with whom we do not always agree or see eye to eye, to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. I think we need to go back to the negotiating table with our friends to ensure that we achieve peace and security and safety for America and our allies and the other countries in that region.
This plan, when you first got into this race, you got beaten up a little bit as somebody who didn't come into it with a set of policy prescriptions. I think this is like the 6th or 7th of these rollouts that you've done over the last month and a half or so. Have you put that criticism to bed?
I want to make sure that the people of this country know how I will serve them as President of the United States on the greatest challenge that we face, climate, and making sure that we confront that challenge before it's too late. We've detailed a very serious, ambitious plan to make sure that we get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, that we're halfway there by 2030, and that we bring everybody in this country in to the solution. On immigration, we've gotten off the back foot and have a very bold plan to make sure that we legalize those in this country who are contributing to our success, that we follow our own laws and our moral guidance at the U.S.-Mexico border and free kids from detention or cages. Don't build that wall, and make sure that we understand that if immigration is a problem, it is the best possible problem that this country could have. And here on veterans, those who've served this country, put their life on the line, willing to sacrifice it in service to the United States of America, instead of patting them on the back or tipping our hat or thanking them for our service, thanking them for their service, we're going to make sure that we deliver with the resources and the focus, the policies and the priorities to make sure that those veterans are cared for. We do this in detail to make sure that we never again have a generation that comes back to this country without the care that they deserve, without the respect that they should be shown, without this country meeting our end of the obligation.
I've watched you put together these policies through the town halls that you do and taking ideas from the people that you talk to. But I'm curious if there's anything that you've heard from any of your fellow Democrats running for president where you think, damn, I wish I'd thought of that. I mean, what's the best idea you've heard from another candidate running?
There are a lot of great ideas. I'm grateful that my fellow Texan, Julian Castro, has also made significant contributions to the debate on immigration. Grateful that Senator Cory Booker has made gun violence a priority. Grateful that Tulsi Gabbard has talked about the consequence of these regime change wars and the need to think about foreign policy not just through military terms, but through the other levers of power in America. Grateful to be part of a field of extraordinary candidates, all of whom want to contribute the most to this conversation and to this country. So I think this is a good sign for the Democratic Party, a good sign for our country, a good sign for democracy that so many talented, experienced people are willing to stand up and contribute to this country.
We'll see a bunch of you on stage on Wednesday. I'm sure you've heard there's a debate on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
How are you preparing?
I'm listening to people. I'm holding town hall meetings, asking folks what's on their mind, how they would meet the greatest set of challenges that we've ever faced, and then incorporating that and hopefully reflecting that in what I say on the trail and what you see me saying on that debate stage, that we are a courageous, a confident, and ambitious people. We will not be known by our fears or divisions or differences as President Trump would have us be known. Instead, we'll define ourselves by the big work that we'll do against the big challenges that we face. This country is up for it. We just need to be brought together. Everyone needs to be brought in. This great democracy needs to be brought to bear on these challenges, and I'm confident we'll meet them, and I'm confident we'll overcome them.
Debating against Ted Cruz is pretty tough sledding, obviously. This is a whole different animal with a bunch of different Democrats on stage. What do you do differently? What's the best advice you've gotten about how to approach this?
It's tough because you're on a stage with 9 other people. You have 60 seconds to answer a given question on some of the most important issues that are out there. So somehow ensuring that beyond the policy points, which many of us will share, that we get across what's different about this campaign. The fact that we've talked about this bold progressive agenda, not just in the easy or convenient or the blue places, but the smallest, the reddest, the most rural counties in Texas, maybe in the United States of America, and ensuring in so doing that we don't write anybody off or take anyone for granted, that we invite and involve everyone in our democracy. So if we can get that across on the stage on Wednesday, if we can reflect back the genius and the power and the ideas and the potential of this country that we've heard all over this country, I'll consider that a success.
Yeah, you sort of took my last question there. I mean, I know you're not somebody who believes in polls or particularly interested in the punditry of this all, but when you walk off the stage Wednesday night or when you get up Thursday morning, how will you judge if you were successful?
You know, if I've been able to get across everything that's been given to us over the course of this campaign, every concern from a family where the parents can't both afford to fill their prescriptions and they're having to ration their care, or families who are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, or young people who come up and say, how come we cannot confront the challenge of gun violence in this country, or climate change, though we know the facts and the solutions, they're right before us. Those challenges, that urgency, the leadership that I'm seeing from young people in particular, if I can convey that, reflect what I've seen, what makes me so excited and optimistic and energized about this country and our future, then I will consider that a success.
You've talked a lot about the children at these camps along the border. I mean, obviously it's a huge deal in Texas. It's a huge deal nationally. There's another big story about this a couple days ago that I think has shocked a lot of people's consciences. You talk about the idea that we all own this, right? Like this was a Trump administration decision, but we as Americans all own this. What should people do? You can't sit around and wait till 2020 to go vote. What should people do who are horrified by what they read?
I was really inspired by people who a year ago on Father's Day came out to Tornillo, more than 1,000, to bear witness to the inhumane housing of children who'd been separated from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. Those kids had just traveled 2,000 miles. They were at their most desperate and vulnerable point, and we had effectively incarcerated them in the Chihuahuan desert just outside of El Paso. And those people who bore witness and testified out to our fellow Americans, they formed the political pressure, the popular will that ultimately forced this administration to at least temporarily stop family separation as a policy of the United States of America. So that kind of direct democracy, people coming in, standing up, being counted at a time that counts more than any other, that's inspiring to me. And I see that happening right now because we still have kids sleeping on concrete floors under Mylar tinfoil blankets in Border Patrol stations.
Without toothbrushes or soap.
Without toothbrushes or soap. A 17-year-old mother who just had an emergency C-section, who is struggling to take care of a prematurely born child, who is stained and soiled in the same clothes that she arrived in, 6 children who have died within our custody at the U.S.-Mexico border. This cannot be America, but it's up to our fellow Americans to decide that question. Yes, at the polls in November of 2020, but right now, taking to the streets, standing up, coming down to Clint, Texas, where that Border Patrol station is, or Tornillo as they did, or Homestead here in Florida, to make sure that we bear witness, testify, and change the policies, because in this democracy, we are a government of the people, and it's up to every single one of the people of America to change this government if we don't like it.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.